Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. And today, Michael picked a great one. He picked a fantastic subject, the Golden Age Batman, starting with this issue, the very beginning, Detective Comics number 27. Which has all sorts of archetypal problems of its own right from the start. But if you were, I don't even know how much a mint condition copy of this comic would cost you today. It'd be a huge amount of money, probably a couple of $1 million. This is the first appearance of Batman. This is Detective Comics, which had all sorts of cop stories and crime stories. The next issue of Detective Comics doesn't have Batman on the cover. It has a mention of him, but it's just a crime cover. And you look at the covers of Detective Comics going back those 26 issues before Batman, you'll see really, really evocative little dramas on the covers that don't have anything to do with Batman. See? It's a acetylene torch that someone is firing at someone else. Fascinating stuff like that. Little mentions are made of Batman on all the covers here, all the subsequent covers, because he started to get a groundswell of attention. People like the character right from the beginning. And that first episode, that first adventure of Batman, there is his very first appearance there up on the roof. The first adventure is kind of weird and presages a lot of problems with this character. One of the odd things that you notice when you read it again for the first time now is that for a first appearance of the character, this is not an origin story. The character is already well known. Everybody knows about the Batman. Nobody knows anything about him, but everybody knows about him. We find Police Commissioner Gordon talking with his socialite friend Bruce Wayne when suddenly Gordon gets a phone call. Those of you who are looking at that picture, that thing in Gordon's hand is a phone. He gets a phone call. Those of you who are young might not know that, and God, it gets worse than that. Doesn't it get worse than that? Yes. Yes, look at this. That also is a phone. It's in two pieces, but it's a phone. But they get a call that the heir to a chemical fortune has been found dead, knife sticking out of his back, and that the son is probably the guilty party because he's blubbering in the next room. And Police Commissioner Gordon, not a lieutenant, not a sergeant on the scene, not anything like that. The actual commissioner of police walks into the room where the son is blubbering and says, "Hello, Lambert. They say you killed your father." He didn't do it. And we see, gunplay goes on after that. Someone is shot in his easy chair by a man in a pinstripe suit, who then climbs onto the roof of the building. He's helped up by his friend, and when they get to the top of the roof, they see the Batman. Dun, 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 dun. He's just standing there with the moon behind him. Very primitive artwork, but you can see that there is a dramatic effect being gone for here that doesn't happen in Superman, for instance. But this does introduce a problem with the character. When you first see the character, you're wondering, okay, this Batman that everybody knows about, what is he? What kind of a fool, what kind of superpowers must he have if he's willing to stand on the incline of a roof 30 feet away from two armed men with no protection of his own? Surely he must be a vampire. Or he might have the ability to cloud men's minds and dissolve into shadows the way his precursor, the Shadow, did. The Shadow is not just an ordinary crime fighter. He's right on the border of having superpowers. There are things he can do that his victims, his criminals, can't do. And they save him a lot of times. They save him. He can dissolve into shadow. He can cloud men's minds or command them. We look at this and we figure, okay, well, if he's not just going to get... both of these guys have their hands on their guns. And they are at point blank range. If he's not going to get shot dead in his very first appearance, in his very first comic, then he must have one of those gimmicks. But he doesn't. He doesn't. Instead, he races across the roof and just tosses these guys around. They don't get off a clean shot when there's no way they wouldn't. There's absolutely no way they wouldn't. And we learn another thing, too, here, because the police show up and they see Batman on the roof of the house. There are guys on the floor. One is on the roof and one is on the ground, but they see Batman, and the cops are not his friend. They want to apprehend him. At the very least, they want to apprehend him. So this Batman is not a hailed and recognized hero, which is interesting at the time. This was a time when, in the late 30s here, when Batman appeared as a feature in Detective Comics, this is a time when editors were throwing superheroes at the wall like spaghetti and just see what sticks, see what people like. There were a million variations on Superman, a million variations on Captain America, a million variations on Batman to see what would stick. So naturally, when you're looking at these early comics, you're wondering why it stuck with this character. You notice the pretty purple gloves that he has. Just about 10 years ago, DC decided, well, we don't want to lose any part of the copyright of this character. As long as we can manage it, we want to manage the copyright to this character. The name, the appearance, everything. We don't want any part of our number one cash cow to move into the public domain. So they did a costume redesign for Batman about 10, maybe fewer years ago, with Greg Capullo doing the artwork, and gave him back the purple gloves, just to make sure that they were constantly using all of this stuff. But we learn, as we're seeing these adventures, that Batman does not have any powers at all. He's a tough guy in a bat suit. When I was rereading this for today's Epic Comic Book Wednesday, I was remembering the artist Jim Lee did a relaunch of Justice League years and years ago. And in this relaunch, all the characters are meeting for the first time. And Green Lantern meets this urban legend called Batman and has no idea what to make of him. He has no idea what to expect any more than the readers of this comic did. And there's a great scene where he suddenly realizes, what, you're just a guy in a bat suit? You don't have any powers at all? You're not a vampire? You're not anything else? You're just a guy in a bat suit? That's kind of the reaction that I have here. This is just a guy in a bat suit. He's not bulletproof, and he's constantly courting being shot by bad guys. It's only at the end of this issue that we get its one big dramatic reveal, which is that Bruce Wayne, this airheaded socialite, is Batman. Commissioner Gordon says, Bruce Wayne's a nice young chap, but he certainly must lead a boring life. Seems disinterested in everything. But he actually leads the most interesting life of all. He is Batman. And these adventures go on. See what I mean here? He's confronted by the police, and when they pull out their guns, he jumps off the roof. They would just go to the roof and shoot him. He's throwing a lasso in order to very slowly slide across from one building to the next. Now, that is fairly evocative artwork. You can tell that the artist here would have done a better job if he'd had the ability to. He's clearly signaling that he wants it to be better. He just can't do it. But if the cops were willing to shoot at him up here, they've got a clear shot there and can't possibly miss him. And the same is true with the bad guys all throughout here. Which means that in due course, in one of these early issues, I forget which one it is, in one of these early issues, we get an amazing sight. I wonder if I can go quickly to it. Yes, we get an amazing sight. The Batman is confronting a gigantic henchman who pulls a gun on him and shoots him. A costume superhero that falls to the floor with blood flowing from a gunshot wound. He just shoots him. And Batman has to make a desperate escape, and he does. And it recovers, the first of many gunshots that he recovers from. But that underscores the difference with this character, as opposed to, for instance, Superman. It's hilarious here. Bruce Wayne is patching himself up in his car, and he goes to his doctor. And the doctor says, all right now, Bruce, how did you shoot yourself when there are no powder marks on the flesh? And Bruce Wayne says, I do funny things sometimes, Doc. I'll tell you about it all someday. Thanks for everything. It's a callback, a classic echo of a classic scene in Superman, where the doctor is also examining a shirtless Superman and saying that this is, I've broken so many needles on your skin, I wonder why. A case in both cases where the doctor involved would raise a ruckus. Would say, well, okay, on the one hand, I've got a patient whose skin is impervious to a needle. It bends on his bare skin. And on the other, I've got someone who's obviously shot. He's obviously a gunshot victim. He didn't shoot himself in the shoulder. So, but anyway, these adventures continue, and when they do, you see the key difference here between Batman and Superman, which is that Batman, look at that detail there. He's throwing his line up and then climbing up the side of the building. Batman is a masked vigilante. He's not whatever Superman was. He's not a being possessed of superpowers, nor is he on the border of superpowers as the great pulp characters that precede him were. The Shadow is on the border of a character who has superpowers. You're never quite sure what he can and cannot do when pressed into a corner. Same thing is absolutely true with Doc Savage. We mostly get the Doc Savage status blunted in that way because of all his gang, his crowd of associates that all have exaggerated characteristics. That tends to blunt, usually until the final chapter of the book, the fact that Clark Savage is virtually superhuman. He has been trained to a point that the books don't underscore it as much as they could. If Doc Savage had a current writing incarnation, I'm sure that the books would encourage that. They would emphasize that a lot more than they do. Actually, that's not true. In the 21st century, all of Doc Savage's assistants would be sex swapped. They would all be women, or maybe they would all be women, but they'd all be lesbians, so they wouldn't have any attraction to Clark Savage. But in competent hands, which is more than we can ask of the 21st century, a lot more stress would be put on the fact that Clark Savage can, bench press 1,000 pounds, maybe more than that, stop his breathing for a day at a time, control his heart, control his reflexes to the finest degree. He has been trained to fairly well, far more than Batman. We don't even know what Batman's training is in these early issues until we get a little montage of his origin story, which doesn't happen for a few issues. We just get the character doing all these sorts of nighttime cavortings. A skinny, dark character. Then eventually, we get his origin story. I wonder if I can go quickly to it. We get slightly more textured artwork, but this is a comic very much in need of an artist who is a little bit better than the one we get. And we see that Batman can think his way out of traps that often involve supernatural elements, like a werewolf, for instance. But it isn't for a while. Yeah, look at that. Classic detective comic. That might be the very last one that we get. A stoic policeman grabbing the Tommy gun of a criminal. And you know he's a criminal because he's got a weaselly little mustache. That used for years. That was the standard cover of Detective Comics. Is you're going to get a cop story. And I don't think, this is number 32. I don't think it happened again after that issue. But we'll just page along here until we get to the first intimation of the Batman's origin. Because we get supernatural events. He fights with creatures. There we go. There's the famous one page that gives us Bruce Wayne's parents are shot. He trains himself in the lab and in the gym. And then he thinks the criminals are a superstitious, cowardly lot. How will I strike fear into them? And just at that moment, a bat flies into his study. And he says, I shall become a bat. And we get that. There's a classic origin page montage. There's considerably more detail. It's not much detail, obviously. Batman fans now will think, wow, that leaves out a lot. But it's a lot more detail than we get for Superman at this time. But once we're done with that origin story and we know something about that, we get on to, I want to page down here. We get on to the seminal event in the Golden Age Batman. The character changes just a bit. He tries to smile. He starts to flesh out a little, but he's still awful droopy. See, that is awful droopy for superhero artwork. The exaggerated flow of the cape is starting to become a signature thing here visually, and that remains a signature thing with this character. But it's very gradual. These things very much give the impression of having been done at speed. But then a change is introduced that is largely the result of the powers that be at DC Comics. Look at that. See, the layouts get more advanced, but also keep having that tick of unbelievability. Look at how far away Batman is from a man with a Tommy gun. Do you know what a Tommy gun is? The guy would only have to pull the trigger to spray the room with gunfire. Batman would certainly die. He'd be cut in half. Instead, he's all the way over here fighting this guy, and then he's all the way over here. Suddenly, all these guys are armed. See, their guns flying in the air. It's just, it's bothersome. But it's getting better. That is considerably, here, let's get back to that. That is considerably better than the artwork we had for Batman in his first appearance in issue number 27. But there's a watershed event that's coming. You all know what it is anyway, so I don't know why I'm being so dramatic about it. But I'm pretty sure that it's in this first collection, which it has nothing in the way of retouched artwork or anything. This is all just very primitive. Yes, there we go. Detective Comics number 38 is the change that goes on here, and that is the introduction of Robin, the character of Robin, who's a little boy whose parents die in a tragic accident at a circus. And Bruce Wayne happens to be in the audience and adopts the boy and shares his secret identity as Batman and enlists him in Batman's war against crime. Do we get Robin's origin? Yes, we do. We get a classic origin page where Bruce Wayne is just there with a flower in his buttonhole and decides to just adopt this boy. While his parents' bodies are still warm, he decides to adopt this boy and swear him in as Robin. Swear that we too will fight against the crime and corruption and never swerve from the path of righteousness. I swear it. Says a little boy that Batman is doing this to. A Batman who we know has already been shot at least once by a criminal at point-blank range. This was the powers that be at DC Comics were thinking, well, boys read comic books. There ought to be a boy in this comic book. It's all just men. It's grown people. There ought to be a boy that will sell on the newsstand. The boys will go by with their hard-earned allowance money, and if they see a boy in the adventure story, and he can't be somber, he's got to be bright and happy with a cheerful smile on his face, puts a smile on Batman's face. They figured if we'll get that audience by introducing that kind of a character. They did the same with Superman. Fortunately, they didn't do it in the same way. How tedious would that have been if Superman had a little boy sidekick? Instead, we get the adventures of Superman as a little boy, and it sold better than anything at DC Comics. But Robin was also immensely popular. I don't know that that's true. I don't know that it's true that that's the reason. I don't think that little boys made this character popular. I could be wrong about that. I don't think that's ever been true. I think a lot more adults have read superhero comics from the beginning than we're willing to admit. It started to take on popular parlance in World War II. Suddenly, adults at least weren't ashamed to be seen, curled up in a trench or in troop headquarters reading a dog-eared copy of the latest Captain America or whatever. But whether I'm right about that or not, this changed the book. Suddenly, it wasn't just you have a crime and Batman figures it out. Instead, there was interplay. It was weird interplay. I can't stress that enough. This is intensely weird. Never mind that it might have been a demographic move that worked, and certainly it did. There's a distinct note of energy that's introduced into the Batman adventures once Robin appears as a character. That is unmistakable. When you're flipping through these adventures, that is absolutely unmistakable. The artwork doesn't much change, but there's something that's there that wasn't there before. This brightly colored boy who is suddenly a friend, a chum, a companion to Bruce Wayne, the lonely, unmarried socialite. But it's weird. It's really weird. What kind of a monster would Batman have to be to intentionally put this kid in the path of deadly violence over and over again? What kind of a monster does he have to be to subject or to endanger this kid with the likes of the Joker? And also to swoop in and get him to swear to that when he's still traumatized by seeing both his parents die. I understand the later Oedipal theorizing that fanboys, the dude bros, have done about this, because they all think that they're Jason Todd. Not Dick Grayson, but Jason Todd. They all think that. They all think they're Jason Todd. But I understand some of the theorizing that they and their God Emperor Tom King have done about this, which is that, Batman himself is an arrested orphan. He himself saw his parents die. It makes sense that of all the possibilities he could have, including a fully grown man who's every bit as trained and talented as he is as a partner, that he would choose an orphan who had seen his parents die in front of him. I don't think that does make sense. That's just a parallel. That doesn't mean it's an explanation. Batman is enlisting this little boy into a war that almost certainly will injure or kill him. And that seems just monstrous to me. The first time I became aware of it, it seemed monstrous to me. Totally different thing with Superman. Eventually, Superman's teenage cousin, Kara Zor-El, is Supergirl. Eventually, a rocket of hers crashes on Earth. And Superman decides to train her in secret and keep her identity secret until she's ready to reveal it to the world. I didn't feel any such qualms about that. Supergirl is indestructible. But Robin? He's no sooner introduced into the adventures of Batman and Detective Comics than he is being bludgeoned over the head, kicked in the face, poisoned, shot up with syringes, tortured. That he's no sooner introduced than that starts to happen. And we never get a sense from the character of Robin what that would be like. I know that's asking a lot of 1930s comic books. 1940 comic books didn't do that sort of thing. It just seems strange. When you take a step back from it, it seems unthinkable now to decouple, no innuendo intended, please get your mind out of the bat gutter. It seems weird now to uncouple Batman and Robin. They seem elementary, like Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. But when you take a step back, it's odd that we're not talking about Batman and Night Owl or something like that, a grown companion who decides willingly to take on this job instead of a weird admixture of trauma and Oedipal longing. In other words, I mean, Robin is portrayed, I don't know if I can get a good image of him. He's portrayed all throughout these early issues as a kind of squat, chunky little kid who's never, there we have the Joker, who has captured Robin, clubbed him over the head, and is going to inject him with something, naturally. But I want to get you a good image of Robin. Well, that's good enough. He's a little boy, but he is rigorously athletically trained, so he can keep up with Batman. He can run across rooftops and climb up on wires and whatnot. He is definitely shown as something of what an earlier generation would refer to as a fire plug. See, here's another example of what I'm talking about. Batman interrupts the Joker on the roof, the balcony of a building. The Joker is holding his gun, and he is 40 feet away from Batman. He pulls his gun and somehow misses. Somehow, so you've got this. The gun is empty, but what if it weren't? Batman doesn't know it is, and neither does the Joker. It's just, and unlike in the famous George Reeves Superman TV series, famously, it's been mocked. It's been lampooned. It's so famous. Famously in the George Reeves Superman TV show, when the bad guys are finished shooting at Superman to no effect whatsoever, Superman just stands there and lets the bullets bounce off him. When they're finished shooting him, typically they will also throw their guns at him, which of course doesn't work either. And that's been mocked to a fairly well. I always get a good kick out of that. But this is a case in which that would work. By this point, when Batman is still, 15 feet from the Joker now knows that his gun is empty. If he threw a 4-pound piece of metal at Batman, it could hurt him. Either way, even if he doesn't throw it, he's still armed, and Batman's not. He's got a club. Anyway, look at that. See, the artwork is trying to be effective. It's trying to figure things out. This imitation of the Superman lettering font just doesn't work and is quickly abandoned. But the moodiness of it very much, I think, owes something to the Shadow. And that just gets better and better as the comic goes on. But really, see, you've got, let me get you a good example here of attempts by this artist to do atmosphere. There are attempts. Look at that. See, that is fairly accomplished. A surging sea like that in a sinking vessel. But it was wonderful to revisit these, and I think these adventures were reissued by DC in omnibus editions, big hardcover omnibus editions. Pretty sure that the original Golden Age Batman omnibus hardcovers are probably pretty collectible by now. They came out, they came out at a time when DC wasn't sure how they would sell. I'd be willing to bet the collectors bought them up. But like DC used to do, they would take omnibus editions and break them up into paperback reprints as well. You usually get 2 paperbacks per omnibus edition. later on. So they're literally printing the same stuff over and over again. And they know that if they commission an original cover for the paperbacks, the people who bought the hardcover omnibus will buy the paperback as well. So you've got collectors and completists will certainly be there for this. I think they did 5 or 6 of these paperbacks. I don't know that these paperbacks are still made. Sometimes it's fun to go through these, to have a paperback instead of the digital copies. The digital copies are really good for zooming in on artwork. But when the art was this primitive, there's not much to be said for doing that. Later on, sure. And I'm sure that Mike and I will get to comics that are a bliss to zoom in on. George Perez's run on the Avengers, for instance. You want to zoom in on that because Perez labored over every detail, every little piece of detail. Not so much in these primitive things here. Although it does get better as Batman goes on. The character became much more popular. DC Comics realized that it had a hit. DC actually stands for Detective Comics. They realized that they had a hit character, that they had somehow had lightning strike twice, that they had Superman and now they had Batman. And they started to bring on different artists, and those artists, I don't think they're in these this first electronic file. I don't know if they'll be in this volume. But it was infamous among Batman fans that one of the artists was much better than the others. One was much more atmospheric than the other. And the other artist, the bad artist is what people tended to call him, tended to draw a lanky, goofy Batman. I don't know if I have any examples of that in this book. I probably don't. No, I don't. These are all just standard Batman artwork. But those artists, they were all, each one had their own special flair, but the artwork started to get more and more advanced, and that doesn't happen in this first volume at all. I mean, you've got an old World's Finest cover, but that was the very beginning of what it was going to turn out to be. What I would argue the most popular comic book character of them all. Not the greatest. Superman is the greatest, and there are waves of popularity where you have Spider-Man or Wolverine from the X-Men or Deadpool or whatever. But I think if you step back and look overall, Batman is the most popular comic book character who has ever existed, and is right now the financial mainstay of DC Comics. Without Batman, they wouldn't sell any comics in a month at all. The Batman comics sell, and literally nothing else does. Which is sure a sign. They are concentrating a lot. They're giving you a lot of Batman content every month because it sells. And that also is merely a period. That is merely a phase, just a contraction. Sooner or later, some other character will jump off. But Batman is always there. And he's been so perennially popular for DC Comics that he has changed very little over time. Far less than any other superhero. Even Superman has gone through unrecognizable phases that lasted for a while. And Superman sales, once DC was infected by the Stan Lee virus, Superman sales weren't what they used to be. And as a result, he was vulnerable. He could be changed. Batman, no. DC is as a penchant, as Mike has mentioned on his channel, DC has a penchant for massive continuity wipes that are a dumb idea. All of them have been a dumb idea. The very first of them was a dumb idea. And typically in those continuity wipes, Batman survives unscathed. The company upper-ups, the money men, know better than to mess with this. So anything else can be drastically changed, but not Batman. Like, for instance, you can wipe out 4 decades of heroic, colorful, wonderful, fantastic, fascinating planet Krypton and reduce it at one artist's whim to a cold, sterile world that pretty much deserves to die. But you can do that with Superman, and the company upper-ups will say just fine. But if you were in the same continuity wipe to say that Bruce Wayne was raised a normal, happy boy and his parents are still alive, they'd come on and you'd like a ton of bricks. You don't mess with the money. So that is the golden age Batman. This is the age in which that character was born and started to gain his weird popularity, despite the fact that he is not Kryptonian. How mysterious. Anyway, that's your epic comic book for today. Sorry to go on at great length, but this was a great deal of fun to revisit. I revisited these things here on the little tablet instead of a big tablet, because I figured out a way to get comic books on a tablet that I can have with me at all times. So that's great. I get to look at them all. But anyway, that is Batman. Golden Age Batman, never been really my cup of tea. I've followed Batman in all of his eras. I've been right on it when every once in a while the character would have a run, when the book would, either Detective Comics or Batman Comics, much like Superman premiered in Action Comics, then got his own book, Superman, and the two ran concurrently. Same thing with Batman, where it was Detective Comics, then he got his own book for Batman, and they both ran at the same time. And I followed those, gobbled up reprints, all of that sort of stuff, saw what writers and artists were doing, what they were trying to do. There were awkward periods where Batman was all but unreadable. There were great periods where Batman, even I will admit, where Batman was the best thing coming out month by month. I've watched all of those, but the character's never really done it for me in the way that Superman did, or most especially The Adventures of Superboy, a muscular teenager in skin-tight spandex fighting crime with his dog, who's clearly a beagle, in the American Midwest. Go figure. But anyway, that is our epic comic book for today. It was Golden Age Batman. A lot of fun to revisit this. If Mike's video is up, I'll link to it down below. But this was great fun, and we'll see what he picks for next week. I'll see you then. Thank you.